He had everything: money, power, control. She had nothing but debt, a sick mother, and a tired smile, yet she gave him what no one else could: peace. Before we begin the story, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Let's dive into the story together. As autumn's last golden leaves brushed across the pavement, the city lights began their quiet shift into a softer, honeyed hue, like the world itself was gently preparing for a night of second chances. La Terrasse, with its wide glass windows and warm amber glow, was the kind of restaurant where people traded solitude for conversation. Some looking for love, others just looking for something to feel. Sophia Whitmore burst through the doors like a gust of wind, headed in the wrong direction. Her hair, tousled beneath a slightly crooked beret. Lipstick faded from the rain. A coat clinging to the last drops of drizzle. And a heart not quite sure it wanted to be here at all. A blind date, after 3 months of what she called an emotional sabbatical. Her friend had begged, "Sophia, you need to feel something again." So here she was. Not hopeful, not excited, just late, flustered, and trying not to trip over her own second-guessing. She scanned the room with quiet panic. Then, a vague wave from the back caught her eye. She made a beeline toward it, unaware that this was not just the wrong table. It was the beginning of a very unexpected rewrite. In the far corner, William Hart sat alone, a man who carried silence like it was tailored just for him. His black suit crisp, tie gently loosened, a glass of red wine catching the chandelier's glow like a still frame in an old film. Before him sat a small, carefully frosted cupcake with delicate lettering. "Happy birthday, Benny." Not his birthday. Benny had been his dog, his best friend, gone just weeks ago. But for years, he always reserved this table, ordered this cupcake, 2 chairs, 1 memory. William wasn't a man who welcomed disruption. He built his life on precision, control, and polite distance. But tonight the disruption was already walking his way. And oddly enough, he didn't look away. Sophia dropped into the seat without pause, flashing an apologetic smile. "Hi, sorry I'm late. The city clearly thinks crosswalks are suggestions." William blinked. She was clearly at the wrong table. But instead of correcting her, he stayed quiet. Something about the way she sat, honest, unguarded, a little breathless, caught his attention. Her eyes fell on the cupcake. "Oh, you didn't have to order dessert already," she said cheerfully. "Cute presentation, though." Before he could respond, she picked off a piece of frosting and popped it into her mouth. William stared. Then, for the first time in weeks, he laughed. Really laughed. "Did you just eat Benny's cupcake?" Sophia paused mid-chew. Benny? My dog." A beat. Sophia's face flushed the same shade as his wine. "This isn't table 12? "Nope, it's table 8, he smiled. "But I'm happy to pretend you're supposed to be here." She met his gaze. Something in the way he said it, calm, amused, and strangely kind, made the mistake feel less like a disaster and more like a soft beginning. And so, on a night neither of them had planned, 2 people who had no business crossing paths, a woman tangled in life's messes, and a man buried in his routines, found, in each other, something they didn't know they'd been missing. A small, unexpected spark of grace. The morning after the accidental dinner felt almost like a dream Sophia wasn't sure she wanted to wake from, or admit ever happened. The city was its usual blur of noise and gray light. Her walk to the office was quiet, almost cautious. She replayed every second of the night before in her head. The cupcake, the laughter, his eyes. Especially his eyes, steadier than she expected, and yet somehow gentle. But she had no intention of ever seeing him again. Some moments, she told herself, are best left untouched. Then the elevator dinged, and the dream, if it ever was one, ended in the most jarring way imaginable. The company's entire staff had gathered in the conference hall that morning. Sophia weaved through the crowd, murmuring a polite, "Excuse me," here and there, clutching her tablet like a shield. She found a spot near the back, just close enough to look engaged, but far enough to hide behind taller shoulders. Then she heard the voice. Calm. Deep. Familiar. And when she looked up, there he was. William Hart. Not the charming stranger from last night, not the man with the cupcake and the offbeat warmth, but the new CEO. Her CEO. The room was hushed as he spoke. Confident, measured, completely in control. Sophia's stomach turned. Her face flushed with the heat of 100 what-ifs. Her mind raced through escape plans, none of them realistic. All she could do was pray he didn't recognize her. Or worse, did. But he didn't falter. Didn't pause. Didn't so much as glance in her direction. And that, somehow, was worse. Hours passed in a blur. Sophia kept her head down, eyes on her tasks, fingers too jittery to type properly. Every footstep in the hallway made her shoulders tense. She tried to rationalize. Maybe he really didn't connect the dots. Maybe she was just another face in a sea of names. Until her phone pinged. A message from HR. "Please report to the executive floor. Mr. Hart would like a word." She froze. Her co-worker Lisa gave her a sympathetic glance. "You're not in trouble, are you?" Sophia gave a weak smile. "I'll let you know when I come back, or don't." The elevator ride felt longer than usual. Every floor ding a countdown to impact. The executive suite was as sleek as a showroom. Glass walls, clean lines, and air that smelled faintly of espresso and decisions. At the far end, William stood by the window, arms loosely crossed, looking out over the skyline like it was just another spreadsheet to interpret. He turned when she entered. Their eyes met. And suddenly the air shifted. He didn't smile, didn't speak right away. Just looked at her. Really looked. Not as a stranger, not as an employee, but as someone he already knew in a way others didn't. Finally, he said, "Miss Whitmore." Her throat tightened. "Yes, sir?" "I'd like to bring someone new onto my executive projects team. You've been recommended more than once." Sophia blinked. Thank you. I didn't realize I don't make decisions lightly." A pause. Then, almost imperceptibly, his mouth curved upward. "And I never forget a face." She met his gaze, half expecting a smirk, a tease, something. But he was unreadable, composed, professional. It was the first time she realized. He wasn't pretending not to know her. He was giving her the choice, how they would move forward from here. And that kind of grace was rarer than charm. Outside the window, the city moved on as if nothing had changed. But inside that room, between two people holding on to more than they said, something quietly had. And the story, it seemed, was just beginning to turn. There was no declaration, no grand confession. Just a shift, subtle and almost imperceptible, like the way light changes just before dusk, when everything softens without anyone noticing. Since the morning of their reintroduction, William Hart kept his distance. On paper, he remained the picture of professionalism. Meetings were concise. Memos were direct. Nothing inappropriate, nothing worth raising an eyebrow over. And yet, the air between them held something else. It lived in the quiet. In the way William's gaze lingered a heartbeat longer when Sophia entered the room. In the faint smile that tugged at the corner of his mouth when she muttered a sarcastic remark under her breath during a long-winded presentation. He never responded aloud. but the glint in his eye told her he heard every word. Sophia, for her part, tried to maintain normalcy. She cracked jokes to ease tension, not just his, but her own. Her energy was offbeat, unpredictable, sometimes clumsy, and often endearing. She named one of their spreadsheets Financial Doom 2.0 and put a cartoon crying emoji in the header. The team laughed nervously. William didn't, not outwardly. But she saw it, a flicker of something. Maybe amusement, maybe admiration, before he looked away. They had found a rhythm, one that wasn't written in company policy or office etiquette. It wasn't spoken aloud, but it was there, pulsing beneath the surface of each shared glance, each accidental brush of hands when passing documents. It hummed softly in the background, like a melody neither dared to acknowledge, but both secretly knew by heart. Their days became a study in restraint. Conversations were brief, efficient, always within bounds, but their eyes often said more than their words. In the elevator, always that elevator, it was as if time slowed. The space, sterile and silver, became a capsule of silence, tension, and something they both pretended not to feel. One morning, after a particularly long strategy session, Sophia stepped into the elevator with a cup of coffee balanced in one hand and a file folder in the other. William was already inside, standing at the back, arms crossed, his tie slightly loosened, rare for him. As the doors slid shut, their eyes met in the mirrored wall's reflection. Neither spoke. The hum of the elevator, the quiet tap of her heel against the floor, the faint scent of cedar wood from his cologne. It all seemed louder in that moment. Then, without turning his head, he said quietly, "You renamed the sales forecast the bleeding ledger." Sophia froze, then grinned. "Too dark?" He finally looked at her, fully this time. His smile was soft. "Unexpected?" A pause. "Still accurate," he added. She laughed, a warm, involuntary sound that filled the small space. He looked away then, but not before she caught it again. That tiny shift in his eyes. That carefully guarded softness. Neither of them said another word before the doors opened, but something had shifted again. Not loudly, not obviously, just enough. Enough to know they were no longer pretending not to see each other. And yet, the boundary between them held firm, respectfully, reluctantly, because they both knew, whatever this was, it could not be rushed. And sometimes, the slowest burn is the one that lasts. The invitation arrived on creamy cardstock, embossed in gold, the kind of expensive paper that whispered influence more than it announced it. William Hart stared at it without blinking, the words almost irrelevant. What mattered wasn't the gala itself. It was who would be there, his ex-fiancée. Madeline Crane. Still elegant, still connected, still far too entangled in the upper echelons of the city's social circles. The charity gala was a yearly event. Black tie, high exposure, and filled with people who watched others not with curiosity, but calculation. Walking in alone, especially after a high-profile broken engagement, would mean questions, assumptions, whispers behind glasses of champagne. He needed a solution, not a romantic one, a practical one. And somehow, when he pictured someone beside him, someone poised enough to match him and grounded enough to not care what others thought, it wasn't Madeline he imagined anymore. It was Sophia. She was reviewing budget notes when he knocked lightly on her open office door. Her pen froze mid-sentence. He didn't usually come down in person. "I have a strange favor to ask," William said, stepping inside. That sentence alone could have meant anything. But it was the way he said it, evenly, yet not without vulnerability, that made her put the pen down. "There's a charity event this Friday. It's complicated." She tilted her head. Go on. My ex-fiancé will be there, and I'd rather not attend alone. There was a beat of silence. Then, before he could continue, she blinked. You want me to pretend to be your date? He didn't correct her. Just for the evening. Nothing dramatic. I trust you. Her eyebrows lifted, slightly amused. That's either a compliment or poor judgment. His lips twitched. I'm hoping for the first. Sophia leaned back in her chair, thoughtful. She wasn't naive. She understood what walking into a high society event with the CEO meant. But there was something in his tone. Not desperation, but honesty. A quiet kind of request from someone who rarely asked for help. All right, she said finally. But one condition. He raised an eyebrow. This stays outside the office. Whatever it looks like, it isn't us on Monday morning. William nodded once. Agreed. The night of the gala arrived like a scene out of a different life. Sophia stood at the edge of the hotel ballroom, the soft fabric of her dark green dress brushing against her heels, a silver clutch in hand, hair swept elegantly to one side. She looked nothing like the girl who once mistook a cupcake for dessert meant for her. And yet, she was unmistakably still Sophia, shoulders straight, eyes bright, utterly present. William, in a sharp black tuxedo, spotted her from across the lobby. His expression didn't change dramatically, but something in his posture eased. You clean up well, she said as he approached. You make me look underdressed, he replied. They didn't need to rehearse anything. They simply walked in together, side by side, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Inside, the ballroom was a sea of satin and glassware, music gliding through the air like something soft and expensive. The lighting was dim, golden, casting everyone in a flattering haze. Laughter floated around them, meaningless and rehearsed. But their table felt like a small bubble outside all of it. She leaned in with whispered jokes during long speeches. He poured her wine without asking. At one point, she reached for his hand under the table, not because anyone was watching, but because it felt easier to hold something steady. They danced once, just once, a slow, unhurried waltz, nothing elaborate, his hand at the small of her back, hers resting gently on his shoulder. They moved without speaking, their steps falling into sync as if they had done this 1,000 times before. And when their eyes met, between the soft strings of a live quartet and the quiet movement of silk and candlelight, it wasn't part of the act anymore. It just was. Later, outside beneath the soft glow of the valet lights, he walked her to her car. Thank you, William said quietly. For tonight. For making it easier than it should have been. Sophia glanced up at him, her breath a small cloud in the crisp air. It didn't feel like pretending. He looked at her then, not with the detachment of a CEO, not even with the curiosity of a man still figuring her out, but with something warmer. Gentler. No, he said softly. It didn't. And in that moment, with nothing grand declared and no lines crossed, something real slipped quietly into place. Not planned, not promised. Just there, waiting to be noticed. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and warm milk, an odd, almost contradictory scent that never quite left, no matter how many fresh flowers you brought to the room. On the 3rd floor, at the end of the hall, room 312 sat quietly with its door ajar, letting in the soft hum of afternoon light. Sophia stood by the window, one hand resting on the ledge, watching a tree bend in the wind. Outside, the world was moving. Inside, time slowed. Her mother, once a vibrant nurse with calloused hands and a sharp tongue, now lay with a blanket pulled up to her chest, her eyes still alert but not always steady. The diagnosis had been early stage, the doctors said. Manageable, they called it. But no word could soften the edges of watching someone you love slip, inch by inch, into forgetfulness. That afternoon, her mother had asked the question again, "Are you seeing someone?" Not out of nosiness, not to matchmake, just a mother reaching for a thread of her daughter's life, hoping to hold on to something that still made sense. Sophia hesitated. There had been many times before when she'd simply laughed it off, changed the subject, or offered a vague, "not right now." But today, her mother's voice had been so clear, so lucid, the kind of rare moment where her eyes felt anchored to the present. So Sophia said, softly, "There's someone, and he's kind." It wasn't a lie designed to deceive. It was the kind meant to comfort. Her mother smiled, a fragile kind of relief settling on her face. "That's good, sweetheart. You deserve kind." And Sophia didn't correct her, because sometimes kindness wasn't in the truth. It was in the hope the lie gave. She didn't expect William to show up. Not there. Not then. But later that week, as she pushed open the hospital room door with a bag of tea and magazines tucked under one arm, she found him already inside. He wasn't speaking. He didn't need to. He sat by the bed, one leg crossed over the other, tie loosened slightly, hands resting in his lap. Sophia's mother was talking, rambling, really, about a memory from her nursing days. William listened as if he knew every detail mattered, even if he didn't understand the story. Sophia stood frozen in the doorway for a moment, unsure whether to step in or turn around and pretend she'd never seen it. But something in her chest tightened, a quiet ache that wasn't pain, but gratitude she didn't know where to place. He glanced up and met her eyes, offering a gentle nod. No explanation, no theatrics, just there. After her mother drifted off to sleep, Sophia walked him out to the hallway. "You didn't have to come," she said quietly. "I know." She studied him for a moment. He wasn't the William from the boardroom, not the polished executive with a schedule down to the minute. This version of him was still, quiet, and somehow more present than anyone else had been in weeks. "She thinks we're together," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. William didn't flinch. Instead, he gave her a look, steady, warm. "Then let's not disappoint her." Sophia wasn't sure what surprised her more, the fact that he said it, or the way he meant it. He didn't take her hand. He didn't move closer. But in that moment, the space between them changed. It wasn't charged with longing or expectation. It was something gentler, something safe. She felt herself exhale without realizing she'd been holding her breath. As he walked away, she leaned against the cool wall of the corridor, arms folded across her chest. What had started as a lie, a simple sentence spoken in love to ease her mother's fading mind, now echoed with a different weight. Because William hadn't needed to act like her partner. He had simply shown up like one. And as Sophia looked back into the quiet room, where her mother slept with a faint smile still on her lips, she wondered if the heart sometimes knows before the mind is ready to admit it. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't pretend anymore, not for either of them. It was late, the kind of late where the streets hummed with quiet rather than noise. The city had dimmed to a soft blur of amber lamplight and closed shop windows, and the only sound outside Sophia's building was the distant hush of tires against wet pavement. William parked along the curb, engine clicking softly in the silence after he turned the key. The ride home had been wordless, but not uncomfortable. It was a silence that held weight, not emptiness. A kind of quiet that only comes when two people stop pretending they don't know what's there between them. Sophia reached for the door handle, then paused. "Thanks for the ride," she said, her voice soft, her fingers still on the handle but not pulling. "You're welcome," he replied, looking straight ahead. But his body didn't move. He didn't reach for the gear shift, didn't glance at his phone. He just sat. She looked over at him. He looked back. And then, for the first time in weeks, no office, no meetings, no reason to pretend, it was just them. No pretense, no roles, just two people sitting in the quiet space between possibility and permission. Sophia opened the car door, stepping out into the cool air, her heels clicking gently on the sidewalk. William followed, walking her to the front steps without saying a word. They stopped in front of the door to her building. A small light glowed overhead, casting a soft amber ring around them, just enough to see each other clearly. Just enough to notice the way her hand gripped her purse a little too tightly, the way his breathing slowed, as if waiting for something he didn't quite trust himself to ask for. She turned to him, her voice almost a whisper. "This is usually the part where someone says goodnight." He didn't smile, but there was a softness in his gaze that hadn't been there before, a kind of openness that wasn't demanding, just quietly present. "I'm not sure where the line is anymore," he said. His voice wasn't hesitant, but it was careful. Not because he feared rejection, but because he understood the weight of the moment, the gravity of choosing this. Sophia's lips parted just slightly, her eyes searching his. "Maybe we're already past it," she said, not quite sure when it had happened, but knowing, deeply, that it had. And then there was that pause, that 1 second of stillness before everything changes. He stepped closer, not quickly, not urgently, but deliberately. And when he reached for her face, just the lightest touch, fingers brushing her cheek as if seeking permission, she didn't flinch. She leaned in. The kiss came not as a spark, but a settling. Not explosive, but anchoring. It was the kind of kiss that didn't ask to be anything more than honest. Tentative at first, like walking into the warmth of a room you hadn't known you needed. Then deeper, slower. The kind of kiss that doesn't search. It recognizes. There was no background music, no witness, just the rustle of leaves nearby, the soft creak of the wooden porch under their feet, and the breath between them. Shared now, like the moment itself. When they finally pulled apart, they didn't speak. Because there are moments when the soul is louder than words. He looked at her, not with intensity, but with understanding. As if to say, "I see you now. Not just the way you look, but the way you carry everything quietly, the way you guard your heart with humor and deflection, the way you want to be held but won't ask." And she looked back at him, her eyes steady. As if to answer, "I see you too, even behind the silence, especially there." Then she turned, gently unlocking her door. "Good night, William," she said, her voice laced with something softer than affection. Something almost like home. He stood there for a moment longer. "Good night, Sophia." The door closed behind her with a soft click. But something had opened that night. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. Enough to be real, enough to matter. The office always felt colder on Mondays, not because of the thermostat, but because the world, after a weekend of softness, returned to its sharp corners. Deadlines, expectations, polite distance. And for the first time in weeks, William Hart was grateful for it. He needed the edges. He needed the structure. He needed anything that didn't feel like her. It had been 7 days since the kiss outside Sophia's building. 7 days since her eyes met his under the porch light, and something unspoken had settled quietly between them. But something had shifted in him since then. Not because of that moment, but what followed. Because one night later, as he worked late in his office, door ajar, lights low, he heard her voice in the hallway. It wasn't the words at first. It was the tone. Rushed, tense. Quiet in that way people get when they're afraid someone might hear something they shouldn't. I'm behind again. Yes, I know how much I owe. No, I can't pay it all this week. Look, I told you, I'm working on it. I've got something going. Just give me time. She didn't know he was there. She never saw him. But those words stuck. And William, for all his brilliance and composure, made a mistake that smart men often make. He filled in the blanks with the worst version of the truth. He didn't ask her, didn't give her the benefit of the doubt. Because sometimes it's easier to believe you've been played than to believe you let your guard down willingly. So he did what men like him do when they feel the sting of doubt. He buried it under something official. On Thursday morning, he had the memo typed, printed, and placed in a plain envelope. No emotion, no explanation, just a reassignment. When Sophia arrived at her desk, she found it waiting. Her name in bold at the top, followed by a sterile offer to transition her skill set to a different department to better support company needs and maintain a clear professional environment. That was the phrase he'd chosen, to preserve professionalism. She stood frozen in place for a long time, fingers tightening around the envelope, lips parted like she meant to speak, but couldn't. Then she knocked once on his office door. William looked up, his expression unreadable. "Is this about what I said the other night?" she asked, her voice quiet, controlled. He didn't answer. She stepped inside, held the letter up. "You think I'm using you?" Still, silence. He looked down at his desk, pretending to focus on nothing. "You think I kissed you because of what? Your bank account?" Her voice cracked slightly, but she held steady. "You think I've been lying to you this entire time?" He glanced up for half a second. Not enough to meet her fully. Just enough to not deny it. That was worse. Her next breath caught in her chest. And when she spoke again, it was softer. But it landed with more force than any raised voice ever could. "I wasn't asking for anything from you. Not your help, not your pity, not even your attention. I was just being honest." He didn't move, didn't apologize, didn't see her. So she nodded once, tucked the envelope under her arm, and walked out. She didn't slam the door, didn't say one last biting thing, because some betrayals don't need to be loud, they only need to be felt. And William Hart, brilliant, composed, always in control, sat alone in his glass office, surrounded by everything he built. And completely unaware that he'd just dismantled the one thing he didn't know he was starting to care about. Night had fallen over the city like a heavy curtain. The skyline glittered in the distance, indifferent and perfect. But inside the office tower, on the top floor, behind a closed glass door, the light in William Hart's office remained on, casting long shadows across the marble floor. He was still in his suit, still pretending to work. But the truth was, he hadn't touched a file in over an hour. He sat at his desk, elbows on the wood, phone in one hand, the other pressed to his forehead. Not in pain, just pressure. That familiar ache of a man who was too proud for too long and now had too much silence to sit in. Across the room, the envelope still lay on the credenza. The one with her reassignment. The one he hadn't had the courage to rescind, even after 3 days of hearing nothing from her. Not anger, not begging, just silence. And that silence? It cut deeper than any confrontation ever could. Then came a soft knock on the door. It opened before he answered. Trevor, his assistant, stepped inside. Reliable, loyal, unflinching. But tonight, something in his posture was different, more hesitant. He held a slim file folder in one hand, eyes scanning his boss before speaking. "Sorry to bother you this late," Trevor said, "but I thought you should see this." William didn't look up. "She's fine," Trevor added, setting the folder down gently. "Sophia. That name." It hit like a dropped glass. William's shoulders shifted slightly. Still silent. Trevor sighed. Not impatiently, but as someone who'd watched the damage unfold and had finally decided it wasn't his job to stay out of it. "She works 2 jobs," he said. "After she leaves here, she bartends 3 nights a week. Not because she wants to, because her mom's sick. Early onset dementia. Home care costs more than she makes here in a month." William's head lifted. Trevor continued. "She's turned down help from everyone. Loans, friends, even her own sister. Doesn't want pity, just wants peace." William stared, saying nothing. "You thought she was using you," Trevor said finally. Not accusing. Just honest. "But she's never asked you for a damn thing." The room stayed still for a beat too long. Then Trevor added, quieter now, "Maybe you should have asked before you judged." He left the file on the edge of the desk. Didn't wait for thanks. Just turned and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. William sat motionless for a long time. Outside, the city moved on. Its lights flickering, taxis passing, lives continuing with or without his awareness. But inside his chest, something cracked. He leaned back in his chair, the file unopened. His eyes traced the edge of the folder but didn't touch it yet. He didn't need to read the details. Not now, because the damage wasn't in what he didn't know. It was in what he chose not to ask. He saw her struggle and assumed manipulation. He felt her hesitation and mistook it for deceit. He'd let his fear speak louder than her truth. And now all he had was a memory of the woman who never once asked to be saved. Only to be seen. He set the phone down gently, its screen glowing blank. Then, without thinking, he pressed his forehead to the desk. No tears, no words, just the weight of a man who finally understood that he had broken something not out of cruelty, but out of cowardice. And now, he didn't want her to forgive him. He just wanted the chance to deserve it. It was late afternoon in the park, the kind of afternoon when the light turned soft and gold, casting long shadows that move slowly across the pavement. The wind was gentle, just enough to stir the leaves, but not enough to interrupt a conversation. Sophia sat alone on a worn wooden bench near the lake, her eyes tracking the ripples on the water as if they held answers. She wasn't waiting. Not really. She hadn't agreed to anything except a walk, but she knew he would come. William spotted her before she saw him. From a distance, she looked smaller somehow. Not weak, just quieter. As if the space around her had expanded to protect her from any more unnecessary noise. He walked slowly. No flowers, no briefcase, no speech rehearsed in his head. Just him. In a dark coat, sleeves slightly wrinkled, eyes carrying the weight of the week that changed everything. Sophia glanced up as he approached. Her expression didn't shift. She didn't rise to greet him. But she didn't turn away either. He sat at the opposite end of the bench, leaving a respectful distance between them. Not out of coldness, but because he understood now. Space is a form of grace. They sat in silence for a few moments, listening to the ducks gliding across the pond and the quiet hum of late-day joggers passing behind them. Then, without ceremony, he said it. "I messed up." His voice wasn't low to be dramatic. It was low because it was honest. "I assumed. I let fear get loud. I judged before I asked. And that's on me." She didn't speak right away. Her eyes stayed on the water. "I don't want to make excuses," he continued, steady but soft. "I just want you to know that I see it now, All of it. Sophia turned slightly toward him then. Not fully, but enough to meet his gaze. Her face was calm, but behind her eyes was a flicker of pain not yet fully named. He took a breath. I looked into your situation, he admitted. Not to intrude, but to understand what I should have asked from the beginning. A pause. Then, if you'd let me, I'd like to help with the debt. Not as your boss, not as anything else. Just someone who cares. The offer landed gently between them. Not as a favor, not as a test, just a truth laid bare. Sophia let it sit there. She didn't thank him. She didn't scold him. She simply shook her head once, the kind of small, sure gesture that says, "That's not what I need." But then she stood. "Walk with me?" Her voice was clear, unforced. He nodded, rising to join her. They didn't touch. Didn't talk much. Just walked slowly along the path, matching each other's steps in quiet rhythm. There was no music swelling, no camera pan-out to mark the moment. But something shifted again, not back to what they were, and not yet into what they might be, just forward. Together, side by side. There was no dramatic return, no scene where she ran into his arms, no rain-soaked confessions in the middle of a crowded street. Instead, there was a Monday morning. Sophia stepped into the building in a navy blue blouse, her hair pulled back simply, her badge clipped to a different department now. She walked past the executive floor with the ease of someone who no longer looked over her shoulder. Not out of defiance, but peace. Her promotion had come quietly. Not from favors or guilt, but earned, through months of steady work, creative thinking, and the respect of peers who saw her as more than someone attached to a scandal that never quite had a name. And William? He let her go. Not out of apathy, but out of understanding. Because trust wasn't something you asked for once. It was something you showed, over and over. So he started small. A coffee left on her desk, never accompanied by a note, but always just how she liked it. Light roast, oat milk, 1 sugar. A short email on a stormy evening. Made it home yet? A meeting where he credited her by name, even though she no longer reported to him. There were no expectations in those gestures, no implied obligation. Just a quiet presence. A rhythm. And eventually, Sophia began to respond. Not with smiles at first, but with acknowledgments. A short thanks, a nod across the conference table, the absence of tension in a shared elevator ride. The hurt didn't vanish, but it loosened. Because healing, for people like her, wasn't loud. It was noticing that someone showed up again and again, without being asked. The turning point came at a company retreat in the mountains. A weekend meant for workshops and trust falls, neither of which interested Sophia, but it was mandatory, and she went. That second evening, the group gathered around a bonfire after dinner. Laughter rose and fell with the crackling wood, but Sophia wandered away from the noise, drawn to the quiet view overlooking the dark treetops. She didn't hear William approach, but when she turned, he was there, hands in his coat pockets, gaze steady. They stood for a while without speaking. It wasn't awkward. It was real. Finally, he said, "I don't know what I am to you anymore." Sophia looked at him. Not with challenge, but calm. "I don't either," she said honestly. He nodded, then looked out at the trees. "I used to think I had to be perfect to deserve something good." Her silence invited more. "But now," he added, voice quiet, "I think maybe I just have to be honest, and keep showing up." He turned to her then, eyes open in a way they hadn't been before, not trying to fix or prove or win, just be. "I don't want perfect," she said. Her voice was soft but certain. "I just want honest." A long pause, then she added, So, if you mean it, keep showing up. Her words weren't an invitation. They were a challenge, a boundary, a bridge. He didn't smile, but he stayed beside her as the wind picked up and the fire crackled in the distance. That night, he didn't walk her back to her cabin. He just said, "Good night, Sophia," and let her walk alone. Because some journeys, especially the right ones, begin by walking separately, toward the same direction. It had been a long, quiet season between them, the kind of season where nothing flashy happened, but everything meaningful did. There were no declarations of love in front of boardrooms, no viral photos, no secondhand whispers of, "Are they or aren't they?" Instead, there were quiet mornings when Sophia texted him a joke from her mother's breakfast ramblings, evenings where William left her favorite book outside her apartment door with a post-it that simply read, "Chapter 12 will make you cry. It made me think of you." Trust, for them, hadn't come back all at once. It returned like low tide, gentle, deliberate, unannounced. And by the time spring gave way to early summer, something had settled between them. Not perfect, not labeled, but present. Sophia had planned the trip for her mother. 3 days on the coast, away from the noise, the appointments, the reminders. It wasn't extravagant. Just a modest cottage near the dunes, the kind where the walls creaked and the sheets smelled faintly of salt and sun. On their second night, after her mother had gone to bed early, Sophia wandered down to the beach. The tide was out, the air cool but kind. She expected to find an empty shoreline. Instead, she found him. William stood beside a table set for two. Nothing elaborate. Just a white tablecloth weighed down at the corners with smooth stones, a simple bottle of wine, 2 mismatched chairs, and the soft flicker of lanterns caught in glass jars. She stopped several paces away, her eyebrows lifting in amused suspicion. "Did you cook?" "No," he said. "I know my limits," she smiled, stepping closer. There were no violinists, no champagne towers, just the smell of grilled fish, the sound of waves, and the look on his face that said this matters. They sat. They ate. They talked like they always did, quietly, honestly. No flirtation, just affection. No seduction, only safety. And when the meal was done, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Not velvet, not glossy. Something simple. Something real. He didn't open it. Instead, he slid it across the table and said, "I'm not asking for forever. I know better than to ask for promises wrapped in ribbon." Sophia tilted her head, listening. "I'm asking for the chance to keep showing up, to keep earning it, day by day, no pressure, no timelines, just us, honestly." She opened the box. Inside, a ring. Delicate, vintage, the kind that felt more like belonging than ownership. Tears pricked her eyes, not because she was overwhelmed, but because she wasn't. It felt like arriving. "You're really bad at grand speeches," she whispered, laughing through the tears. He grinned. "And you still ate my dog's cupcake." That made her laugh harder than she expected. And in that moment, barefoot in the sand, eyes glossy, hearts steady, she nodded. Yes. No theatrics, no crowd. Just 2 people, long past the age of falling for fantasy, choosing each other with eyes open and hearts intact. Later, when they walked back to the cottage, the wind brushing their sleeves, he reached for her hand. Not because he had to, but because he could. They didn't wake up the morning after their wedding feeling transformed. There was no choir of birds, no montage of blissful breakfasts in bed, just the familiar weight of the world waiting on the other side of the front door. And the quiet understanding that love, when it's real, doesn't change who you are. It simply gives you a steadier place to stand. Marriage didn't fix them, it rooted them. And that, for William and Sophia, was more than enough. They moved into a modest house just outside the city. Not the penthouse suite everyone expected from a man like him. Not the bohemian walk-up she might have chosen alone. But something in between. A place with worn hardwood floors, and a kitchen too small for two people who liked to argue over spice racks and counter space. Sophia's mother moved in part-time, bringing with her boxes of old linens and a habit of baking pies at inappropriate hours. She called William my favorite son, even though he'd never officially been anything else. He took it in stride. She taught him how to knead dough. He taught her how to silence a stubborn smoke alarm. It worked. Their days weren't cinematic. They were practical. He still worked too much. She still rolled her eyes when he forgot to take off his tie at dinner. They disagreed on how to load the dishwasher, how many throw pillows were too many, and whether a Sunday drive counted as a date, but they talked, they listened, and they didn't run from the hard parts. When they fought, it was quieter now, less about winning, more about staying. On weekends they walked the dog. A new one, yes, but with the same soulful eyes as Benny. He loved Sophia unconditionally and barked at William only when he took conference calls on their walks. They stopped at the same bench in the park, where they once sat with unspoken tension between them. Now it was where they planned dinners, made sarcastic bets about their neighbors' lawn decorations, and sometimes just sat in silence, watching the wind move the trees. One night, after the dishes were done and her mother had gone to bed, they sat in the dim light of the kitchen. A pie, slightly burned on one edge, cooled on the counter behind them. The radio played something soft and old. Sophia's head rested against William's shoulder, his arm wrapped loosely around her waist. The world was quiet. The moment, full. He turned to her and said, barely above a whisper, "I never expected you." She smiled, the way you do when you've heard something for the first time and known it all along. "But you stayed," she said. "That's what matters." And he did. He always would. Love isn't about saving someone. It's about standing beside them when they're already saving themselves. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and rate the story from 1 to 10. What was your favorite moment? Did it remind you of real love? The kind that grows quietly, day by day? Don't forget to like the video if you believe love doesn't have to be loud to be real. And subscribe for more heartfelt stories.